many children will think that moms of onlys have it so easy. And in a lot of ways we do. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There are a lot of perks. When you have only one child, you have to be very intentional about not making everything about your child.
I think in some ways, from an academic standpoint with Master Books, it lends itself well not only to large families, but also to individual students because it was written more from the standpoint of individuality.
Very much. Yeah, that's been one of our big perks, I think, of switching completely to Master Books. We use Master Books for all subjects now. And our school day is shorter as far as bookwork goes, but it is not shorter as far as exploring interests and things.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. We're having two teaching tips today actually, and the first one I'm excited about. I am joined by Libby Pritchett. Did I pronounce your name right? Pritchett?
Pritchett.
Pritchett.
Yes,
okay.
But it happens a lot. It's okay.
And you are one of the moderators in the Moms of Master Books group that we're delighted to have on our team. And you've attracted a lot of our attention in over the past year because your family is unique in that you have one child that graduated and is in college, and then you have one child that's younger, Chloe, who is an only child that you're homeschooling. So how did you start homeschooling? Like what drew you to homeschooling Chloe?
I'll be honest, I didn't want to at first. In fact, it was my husband who suggested it. He had some friends who had homeschooled. Our local homeschool association does a graduation ceremony, and he had gone to support a friend, and he suggested that I homeschool, and I laughed at the idea. And I was adamant that it wasn't for me, but I told him I would pray about it, and I did, and God just started really laying it on my heart that this was what we were called to do. So, in my mind, at some point, we just realized that there was no other option, that we were going to figure this out and do it, and we did.
Yeah, awesome. Now, so your other daughter, she's in university. Did she go to private school or public school or?
She was in public school. We actually lived in Arkansas when she was in school.
Okay.
So she actually graduated from public school there and went on to the University of Arkansas, where she is a senior now.
Okay. And was Chloe ever? Was she was in school? Or
no, we did just a short little 3-year-old preschool at the church down the road.
Okay.
But it was 2 mornings a week for an hour and a half, something like that. I mean, it wasn't a school setting really.
Okay. So she's kind of always known, and the only thing she's known was homeschooling.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So the challenges, I guess there's going to be pros and cons with this. What would you say are the biggest challenges of homeschooling an only child?
One of the biggest challenges that I think that other moms of onlys can relate to is the fact that we have to be more intentional about socialization. I know that's kind of a taboo word among homeschoolers, but when it comes to having an only child, you do have to be more intentional because I am her playmate. I am with her all the time. So in order, yes, we go to church and she has her friends at church, but I have to really seek out other options. She's extremely extroverted. I am not. So I really have to make an effort. If I got to tell you, this whole quarantine thing, being at home, is not bothering me in the least. I'm good being home. But her words are that it's stopping her groove. That's what she's told me.
That's funny. Okay, so the socialization aspect, how are you intentional about that? Like what for us, we had 9 kids. And so from after, I think maybe my oldest was 3 or 4 before my son came. And then, from then on, it was just always a tribe. And in the peak of it all, we had a business in our home. And so, like, one day I remember we had 17 people in the house. And so between my family and employees, and I had 2 tractor trailers with FedEx, and they were unloading product in the front yard, and then, you know, there were salesmen in the house. I mean, it was just always insane. So my kids always had just a ton of stimulation from our life and each other. How do you go about providing that socialization in a 24/7 type world?
Well, we have, as I said, we're very involved in our church. We also do a scouting program in our area. We're involved in a co-op that meets every other week, but they also meet for field trips and, holiday parties and things like that. She takes classes at the local museum, art classes, a lot of kinds of things that maybe if I had a lot of children, it would be difficult because some of those things would get to be pricey. So, but only paying for one child, as an example, for our museum, I believe I paid like $70 a year for a monthly class. Well, that's okay for one student to go, and they do dissections and all sorts of things. But if
Yeah.
I had 3 children I was paying for, that would be cost prohibitive, obviously. So,
Right.
So we just try to make sure, we volunteer last month, in February rather, she got to go volunteer for the food bank locally. We got to unpack boxes they were providing for the school lunch program that they do. We do a book club that meets once a month. So we really just have a lot of activities, and it sounds like it can be a lot, but it isn't overwhelming really. It's really worked out well for us.
Yeah. Yeah. We tried doing like sports programs and stuff like that. And when you have massive amounts of kids, they're just pulling you in all directions. We did soccer even when we first moved to Arkansas. And it's like they can't just all play soccer on one day in one field. It has to be scattered everywhere in 3 cars. And, it was just, it wasn't designed for a large family. Where some of these activities I would think would be more suited towards that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask, I want to make sure I say this right, but you have the privilege of having your sea legs as a parent. You have a baseline because you have an older daughter where you got to see this is kind of what normal socialization looks like, right?
Yeah.
So you can monitor that. Now, some of the moms that maybe are listening don't have that baseline. They don't know, like, what's healthy. And if my child is introverted, you've also got a very vivacious daughter.
Right.
What about a child who's more insecure or is more of an introvert? What advice, how would you kind of address that?
I feel like, as you said, I do have the experience of having my older daughter who happens to be very much like me and being an introvert. So even when she was in public school, she was not the outgoing type. She had a couple of really close friends that she liked, and that she spent a lot of her time with. We were fortunate to live in a neighborhood where there were little girls her age on either side of us in houses, so she really clung to those girls. So I would say that if you don't have a child that's just super outgoing and craving that, and if they're perfectly happy being home, maybe just try to find a way that you can kind of cultivate a couple of really close, meaningful relationships versus trying to put them in everything. Because I know for myself as an introvert, I would be miserable if I were into forced, socialization type situations. It would not be rejuvenating for me whatsoever. It would be very stressful. And I dealt with that even as a child myself. I had a lot of anxiety that came from being I wanted to be alone, or not even alone. That's not the right word. But I just didn't need that interaction all the time. It was stressful. So I think just having those close relationships and doing what you can to just really cultivate those close relationships, that can be just as valuable, I believe, as, doing a lot of the extracurriculars that they may not crave.
So you've been part of the culture here long enough. The term growth hacking isn't new to you, but I would think growth hacking would be the right approach. Test something. but don't feel the need to force the student. Like when would you force a student? When would you say, no, I think it'd be really good for you to go again?
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. I know with my older daughter, we had a tendency, she would try something new like every year. It seemed like this year she wants to try soccer. Next year she wants to try, t-ball or whatever it was that she was doing at the time. And typically I made her complete whatever our commitment was, rather than after a couple times saying, no, I don't want to do it anymore. But if she showed interest and we signed up, we stuck it out and, we finished it. But I didn't force her to sign up for a second semester if it wasn't something that was interesting to her.
Okay. But were those were things that she had expressed an interest in? So
yes and no. Some of it was me recommending that it would be a good interest for her.
Okay.
Oh, look, this would be really fun. Our church league had like a little soccer program that they did. So it was a low commitment. So I felt like I did push her a little bit to try that. And it wasn't her thing, and that was okay.
So once there was a commitment, she understood if we commit to this, you're gonna follow it through because that's teaching character. And then I would assume you would just be careful or recommend to somebody, be careful about the commitments you make.
Yes. And I would say as a mom of an only that I'm homeschooling, it's very easy to overcommit. Very, very easy. And I don't know if it's as much of a problem with people with a larger family because maybe those moms recognize their limitations a little bit more. I won't say often, but in the past I've overscheduled to the point where, I feel like we can fit more in than we can. And then I find I'm the one who ends up feeling rattled by it all.
Yeah.
So definitely making sure that as the mom, you're not overcommitting yourself either. Even if the child can handle it, sometimes it's too much for mom.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about homeschooling the only child. And I'm joined by Libby Pritchett.
Yes.
Yes. And she has one daughter. What grade is your daughter in?
She's in second grade.
Second grade. So now I've seen, though, she's over the last years we've kind of been exposed to your family. She's developed a game, right?
Yeah. She's very creative and outgoing. She created a game when she was 5, which was part of a homeschooling thing. We were doing a unit study at the time, and she had an idea. She said, I'm going to make a game. And she did. So that has led to a lot of opportunities for us as well. We've worked vendor booths at different, fairs and things, flea markets, things like that. So She's had that opportunity as well.
Yeah. So she's just one that, your issues are going to be, I have a daughter like this. The issues aren't necessarily getting socialization. It's keeping socialization,
I know. I often joke that our biggest challenge of homeschooling is being home to school because we are on the go far too much. So here's my cat.
Okay, so what other cons, if you will, would you have? Socialization is one. Can you think of others?
Another is that sometimes in curriculum, there may be review games or activities that are built in that are sometimes you can see where they would be more fun if you had more students playing it rather than just student and mom.
Yeah.
So we run into that sometimes, and we just kind of power through. We've learned ways to kind of get through that. But that definitely is something. We play a lot of board games for our family, mom, dad, and Chloe. So that when it comes to just playing the games and doing the review activities for school, we adjust a little bit, but that's definitely a challenge. I would say it's also often easy for the student can kind of become too dependent on mom, because she's got my undivided attention when school. This past year, she's gotten better about, I will show her what we're working on. For example, if we're doing language lessons, I'll say, earlier this week, we talked about quotations. That was our lesson. So I showed her that this is what a quotation mark looks like. This is how it's used. Now here's your assignment. And I think it was, write a sentence or two or something like that. And I was able to get up and walk away and let her do that. So we're slowly building that independence. But I feel like there's more times that she relies on me to be there just because I am there. I don't have to say, you work on this while I work with your brother.
Right.
So.
Right. So how do you handle like playtime? Like what does that even look like? For me, I can send my boys, like we have pairs, and it's easy just to send the boys out and say, hey, you guys get outside and go play. Yeah.
She is very good at keeping herself entertained. She's very creative. So like yesterday she spent, I want to say like an hour in the afternoon, she was following a YouTube tutorial on drawing. She loves cheetahs. That's her big thing right now. And it was a YouTube tutorial on how to draw a cheetah. So she was following this tutorial. So she's very good at finding things that are interesting to her. She loves imagination. We have 2 cats, as you can see, one behind me here. She plays with them. And I know that sounds so sad, but she just keeps herself entertained. I mean, we play. I mean, I don't sit down and play, on the floor toys with her or anything, but
right.
We do play board games. We read together a lot. A lot of hers is just imagination stuff, and she'll come in and pretend that she's a superhero or something, and I'll just interact with her on her superhero. She likes to pretend that she's not Chloe, and that I have to. So there's a lot of interaction going on, but not so much sitting down and playing toys.
Yeah.
So
my brother was 6 years older than me, and so he is, we didn't live in the same realm most of our lives, and my parents were active in ministry, and so I spent a fair amount of time alone, and I don't necessarily look at that alone time as negative, because I did learn a lot of creativity, like how to entertain yourself.
Right.
And that's where we see a culture right now. We're home and we're doing nothing, and
yes.
We're having a hard time entertaining ourselves. So I think that's actually a skill that if you can learn to do it. We're watching this show, you binge watch shows, but the name of it's like Alone, where they take these people and they take them out and they drop them off in the wilderness, and they're survivalists, and they just say, see how long you guys can survive. And it's all a mental game, and they're win or lost by the ones who can like entertain themselves, and it's so amazing how the ones that break are the ones that crave that social connection. Yeah.
I can definitely, I don't know. I think I would be okay because I don't need the social connection, but I'm not an outdoorsy type. So that would be what would do it for me.
Yeah. I've often said my idea of roughing it was, Comfort Inn versus Hampton Inn.
Right? Yes, exactly.
So Kristen, she'd be different. Kristen could go out in the wilderness and probably survive for years without seeing another person. But yeah, that's not me. If there wasn't a cookie in the lobby, I'd be like, this is roughing it. I shouldn't admit that probably. But okay, so any other challenges that you can imagine somebody would be facing that's in a similar spot?
One thing that I have found is that as mom, sometimes it's hard to relate to the other homeschool moms, in, whether it be at a co-op or online, because we don't face the same challenges. So, when another mom is talking about, how do you balance teaching 3 kids when you've got a toddler underfoot? I've never experienced that. So, and I feel like one thing that I've noticed is that sometimes moms of many children will think that moms of onlys have it so easy. And in a lot of ways we do. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There are a lot of perks. I can definitely plan more of the hands-on projects and things like that, and the crafts and the activities, because I'm only planning for 1 child versus trying to do that for 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But that it does there's kind of I hate to say a rift, but just an imbalance, I think, between, not being able to really relate with each other. So that can be a challenge. You just have to be able to, kind of find that middle ground and appreciate that you both have your own challenges, but they're just not going to look the same.
Yeah. This is, I think empathy is such an important need for us as parents, right? So when as a family, you decide that you're going to fulfill God's command to populate the world, be fruitful and multiply, right? And you start, you have your first child and then your second, your third. All of a sudden, society changes, and you have to develop a little bit of an arrogance to be the family who walks into McDonald's with now 4 kids when the benches only hold enough for 4 or 5. And I know for us, then your game continues to develop, and your buzzwords, your attitude begins to develop. And so pretty soon you have 9 kids. You drive a conversion van or a 12-passenger van, one of the coolest vehicles in town, obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah. And that becomes your identity, right? So now you're the dad of 9 kids, and you've broken all societal conventions. You're the rebel who now has 9 kids. And I know at times it's hard then to not carry that into a room, because I'm the one who, when I walk into a church with 9 kids, most of the people in a group are going to look at me and say, there's 1,000 buzzwords, there's 1,000 things that people are going to say that I can't say because we have PG audience. But you know what I'm saying? It's you're used to fighting that, and then all of a sudden, so in a group in the homeschool movement, it's a little different because there's a lot of large families, and if you have 12 kids, you're kind of at the top of the pecking order. I once went to pick up a triple bunk bed, and when I got there, the lady was like, she's like talking about her kids, and I'm like, well, 9 kids. Usually if I say that, people are like, oh my goodness. So I'm like, how many kids do you have? And she's like 17. And I felt like I was a nobody, because they had like 10 of their own and had adopted 7 from, and I was just like, I almost felt embarrassed. So I think we have to know that does exist, and those attitudes come from having to break against societal norms and then a culture that also honors that. Where if I was going to the public school events and I walked in with all my kids, it would be a constant walk of shame, because people would be like, there's that family again that is overpopulating the world. So I say that to say, I think that there's that tension that exists naturally in homeschooling between large families and families that have 1 or 2 kids. Do you feel that?
I do. And, I haven't experienced any, real negativity or anything about it, but there's definitely just a bit of tension. I remember I've had people in a lighthearted way say, oh, well, that's so sweet, but you only have 1 child,
Yes.
like, we're working on this, and they're like, oh, well, if I only had 1 child, I could do that kind of thing too. So, and no one means anything by it. I mean, it doesn't hurt my feelings at all. But it is something that you have to be aware of, because it would be very easy to start kind of taking those comments personally. But likewise, we have to be careful not to judge those who have large families. There's just a difference there.
Yeah.
One of the challenges in that regard is just something that is the same for whether we were homeschooling or not, is that when you have only 1 child, you have to be very intentional about not making everything about your child, making sure the child doesn't feel like they have equal say as mom and dad and everything, something as simple as, where do you want to go out to eat? We often go out to eat after church, and a lot of times my husband and I will both say, I don't care. I don't know. I don't care. And then Chloe will say, well, I want this. So, often we'll end up going there, but we have to make we have to be specific in saying, no, we're not going to let her do that all the time, because we don't want her to think that her opinion carries as much weight as mom and dad, because, frankly, it doesn't.
Right.
So I think that's just something, not necessarily just with homeschooling, but just in parenting an only child that we have to deal with. But especially in homeschool when we're together all the time. I'm with her from the time she gets up in the morning till the time she goes to bed at night. I'm even one of her scout leaders. So, we are together all the time.
I think in some ways, from an academic standpoint with Master Books, it lends itself well not only to large families, but also to individual students, because it was written more from the standpoint of individuality, where it's designed for independent learning. It's designed not for a classroom. And that's all the time I'm saying, don't compare apples to oranges. You can't compare a Becca to Master Books. They're just two separate products written for two separate target audiences. And you can adapt to them to fit your needs. But where say in a Becca, which is an awesome evangelical curriculum that has had a proven track record, but it was written for schools with a teacher. And so for some families, it works awesome. And we embrace that 100%. But then there's other families where that classroom mentality or that group mentality doesn't work as well, and the individual approach works really well. So I would think that, like with Master Books, a shorter lesson, well, there may not be as much occupying their attention for as long. It gives you a lot of opportunity to really go and explore those interests in the rabbit trails.
Very much. Yeah, that's been one of our big perks, I think, of switching completely to Master Books. We use Master Books for all subjects now. And our school day is shorter as far as bookwork goes, but it is not shorter as far as exploring interests and things like that, because we do have so many things that, maybe we're reading something in my story that just sparks a little idea of something for her. And, we go I believe, I think we were studying India in my story, and we read about it in the Children's Atlas of God's World. Is that what it's called? And they talked about how they invented chess, the game chess in India. And my daughter was fascinated. She was like, well, can I learn to play that? Well, so I got out our old chess set and we learned to play chess, just because it was just a little something. So we spent a whole afternoon just playing chess, because it's something that she read that she was interested in. She loves cooking, so we often find recipes that go along with what we're studying and learning about. Lots and lots of rabbit trails. I often let her choose the subjects that we're going to study, because I know, which again is a perk to having only one, because I can say, what do you want to learn about? And it's just whatever she wants, we can learn. She's chosen for next year, she wants to do the elementary world history report. And she is so very excited about that and all the possible rabbit trails.
That's just an awesome course. Yeah.
I've heard that the author is very modest. I think that's what I like the most about it.
Probably not real modest on that. It was written for a lot of room to explore topics that are interested and not have to spend time on topics that don't. When you explore topics that are interesting, you almost always end up exploring the not so interesting topics as well later on. Well, I think, the individuality, even in that aspect, I think going back a little bit to kind of the peer pressure in homeschooling that happens, and that happens at all levels. That happens with curriculum, it happens with family size, it happens with what church you attend, all of these things. There's different peer pressure. And that's going to happen, from the time you're in school. If you went to any kind of community-based public school or private school, you learned the game of social warfare, I guess, to the time that you're an adult and you walk into church with your family and you're trying to understand, where are people, how do we classify these people, where are the dangerous spots, all of these things. One of the things I like is having buzzwords and a little bit of swagger, so you own who you are and you become comfortable with that. I think being able to say, as you were talking about, really being able to focus on their interest in that. One of the things that I would look at saying is, yeah, my child has a 1-to-1 ratio, teacher-student ratio, and
I actually wrote that down on my list of pros.
did you?
I literally wrote that.
And that's a swagger point. That if you have 9 kids, your ratio is 1-to-9, and they only get 1/9 of you. They're not going to get. They're not going to get the fullness of education that you can give if you can devote more time to really exploring their individuality, because you just can't do it logistically.
Right.
So let's talk about a little bit of the pros. What are some of the pros that you would say that, what are your swagger points?
Well, as I think I kind of touched on, that we are able to do a lot of the crafts and the hands-on and the field trips and things like that, that maybe if I was schooling a lot of children, we might not have as much time for. I often hear people say, oh, we skipped that. Well, we skip an occasional craft or project, but we do the vast majority of them because she loves them. We've got time for it, especially in Master Books. Almost always the materials are things that we already have at home. Or, just to touch on that for a moment, a lot of times I will look at my grocery list about a week or so out and say, oh, next week we're going to be doing this project, so I need to make sure that I pick up this item. Maybe we needed tin foil and I'm out of foil. But little things like that. So the hands-on things that we have so much time for, field trips, we do probably at least one field trip a month, sometimes more, maybe not always, but we've got time for those things. As you said, the individuality, the rabbit trails, I can follow her lead in what she wants to study. She's actually begging me to do 3 separate sciences next year, and I'm having to draw the line there. So I told her I'm willing to do 2, but we're not going to do 3. That's too much.
Yeah.
So we can do those kinds of things. As I said, when it comes to doing some of the extra classes, the art classes, the co-ops, the classes at the museum, it's less expensive because I'm only paying for one child. Therefore, we do have the opportunity to expose her to more things like that, where, if I was having to pay for several children, I would have a tendency to probably just say, no, we can learn science at home. We don't need to go to the museum for that. One thing is the flexibility just in our scheduling, which is kind of a pro and a con, because it's very easy because school is so short and we can just follow our lead. Sometimes it's easy to get off on a creative tangent or, doing something and saying, oh, it's 2:00 in the afternoon and we haven't done our book work yet, so
yeah.
My goal is always just to have book work done before Dad gets home from work. So the flexibility though is nice. But I know I've got friends with a lot of children who they will schedule their school day to start early, because if they don't start at 8:30, 9:00, it's just they're going to be off all day long. So I do appreciate that flexibility. Another thing is just that our relationship is so close. As I mentioned, we're together all the time, one-on-one. She tells me things that I can only assume that some 8-year-olds would not want to tell their mom. She's just we're very close at that. Another perk is the comparison games that I think a lot of parents play when they have multiple children. Maybe the younger child is catching up to the older child, and my older child was a really good, advanced reader, and this child is struggling, and it would be very difficult not to make those comparisons. I think you would know more about that than I do, but I would think that would be something that I don't have to deal with that maybe you guys did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's easy that it's harder to keep everybody individual, to say this is a unique creature before God, that God has gifts and talents, and not trying to just, the average, so to speak. So, yeah.
I think for us, another perk is that we can be spontaneous, because I only have the one student. We've got short days. If it's a beautiful 80-degree day and our friend calls up and says, hey, let's go have lunch at the park together, we can do that, because we know that we can catch up on our book work either after lunch or, it's easy to make up those things. So we can be spontaneous. When an opportunity comes up at the last minute, we can do that. Now, obviously, we still get all of our schoolwork done. We get our days in that we're required by our state. But just as far as being able to just go have fun at the last minute, we can do that. And I would imagine that would be a bit more of a struggle if I was juggling several schedules, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing is that there are fewer distractions when we're doing school. I would imagine, again, so much of this is just what I think it must be like to homeschool a large family, but I would imagine that there's probably going to be distractions with younger siblings or, even another sibling doing schoolwork that is keeping your child from focusing on what they're doing. Whereas for us, when she does schoolwork and there's no distraction. She sits down and knocks it out. There's no fussing or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then the final point that I can think of for me, and this is really Master Book specific, is that there's very, very little planning to do because everything is so open and go with Master Books. So I can literally, and only having the one child, but even if I had several, I think, just the fact that I can sit down and I spend probably 20 minutes on a Friday afternoon preparing for the next week, just making sure that I've got anything that I need on my grocery list, making sure, just kind of glancing at the upcoming lessons just to get an idea of what we're going to be studying. Maybe I want to see if there's a library book I want to get on a certain topic. But really, it's just a few minutes a week, and that is so wonderful. But again, I think that even if I had more students, Master Books makes that easy anyway.
Yeah, the friction points, no matter what size family is something that we just work hard to remove. At the end of the day, every child is kind of an only child in that they're unique, and that's what we want families to look at and try to celebrate that. So, okay, so we've covered quite a bit. I think one of the inhibitions for families, I would think if you have a lot of kids, it's easier to convince a larger family to homeschool, maybe. Because we hear people say, well, they're an only child, and they just have that concern. How would you sell me if I was, a child that was going to be by themselves if I homeschooled? What would be your advice?
Well, as we talked about, you do have the ability to follow their lead. And when my husband and I decided to homeschool, we sat down and wrote out our goals that we wanted for our homeschool. And one of our top goal was that we wanted it to be focused on Christ above all. Our second goal was that we wanted whatever we do to develop strong character traits. And our third goal was that we wanted it to be I hate the word rigorous, but we wanted a level of education that would allow her to follow whatever dream she wanted to pursue.
Sure.
So everything we've used, we always measure it against those goals. So if I were talking to someone who wasn't sure about homeschooling an only child, I would probably just say that those three things are such a benefit, whether whether you have one student or five. You can't get that anywhere else. Those are things that you can be so intentional about. And to me, those things outweigh any cons that you can come up with. But beyond that, people worry about like the curriculum. And there are certain companies that the curriculum is geared toward large families. So I can see where that would be a deterrent for someone if they were looking at having to spend, $600 for a curriculum set for one student. So I would definitely talk about the cost and how it doesn't have to be cost prohibitive, that it can be something that in a case like Master Books, it's very affordable. Mm-hmm. And I think that is often something that people kind of, is it going to cost so much money? But really, we're getting a private education, as private as she can possibly get, and, following exactly what she needs to know, what she wants to learn. I don't know. I really can't say enough of the perks.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, over the years, we've seen a lot of families homeschool and a lot of different challenges. And usually the challenges that are against us with homeschooling aren't worth the trade-off, right?
Right.
And we can overcome those things. There's co-ops, there's church events, Awanas, or different social things that children can do. Even we are kind of our kids' best friends, and even though I have a large family, I would imagine it's very much the same in that situation where it's like, and that closeness doesn't change. So as they become adults, we still are best friends. And there's, when something exciting happens, they're the ones I want to know about it more than anything else. In fact, one of the harder parts of this homeschool game, and I mean, you've gone through it with an older daughter, but I think I don't know. I know it's intense with homeschooling because we're together 24/7 is when they launch. And you really have to grieve that aspect of, my best friend just has moved on without me.
Yes.
And it's not.
I'm so thankful for technology right now, just to be able, I talk to my older daughter every single day,
Yes.
She's always texting me things. She just finished her senior thesis and sent it to me to read to see, get my thoughts on that. And you're right. That has been the hardest part, is seeing them launch out into the real world and kind of become themselves. And you just pray that you instilled what you needed to instill in them for them to succeed.
Yeah. And even know that their journey is their own. And when they get beat up a little bit, that's part of what God is doing in their life, and you have to let that happen. And it's just, it's brutal.
Yeah.
It don't matter how many kids you have. I mean, it's just, I always said, we'll make more. But now it's like five are out, and they're finding their way. And it's like, Kristen we have a cabin, and she's at the cabin with two of the boys. And so she had treatment yesterday, and I went and hung out with her, and it was just weird. We cooked I'm like, there's a little pan on the stove, and there's just a little bit of food. There is no way we have enough food in the pan. And yeah, just, it's just crazy what it's like in that environment, but it's going to be our environment too. So.
And we always have leftovers. No matter what I cook, there's always leftovers.
Yeah, well, I'll say Kristen's actually nailing it up there. So I'm like, it was perfect. So I think something that I really want to be sure to end with is, because we've talked a little bit about large families and small families and everything else, is every family is unique, and God's purpose and plan for that family is between them and the Lord, and the circumstances and everything else isn't really for anybody else to judge. And so I want to make it clear that as we've had discussion today, and I talked about tension and stuff like that, we're not saying one is better than the other, or that there's something that should happen. It's more, this is just a reality of what it's like to be in a social circle in a homeschool movement. And over the years, mommy shame is just a huge thing that I've seen, and people not feeling they were measuring up for one reason or another. And I want to make sure that we don't have any, there was no, I guess, we don't have any, that wasn't the intent of this discussion.
No,
it's more to help families that have an only child know that you're not alone. There are other families that homeschool and do it very well. I commend you, Libby, for what you've done with Chloe, and the energy that you bring into parenting her and homeschooling her. From the outside looking in, it's an inspiration, because sometimes with a large family, you do have to be very intentional, and you have to spread out your attention between that. And you look at a child like Libby, who's getting a lot of individual attention and has a lot of personal opportunities for growth. And it's challenging to say, okay, I've got 5 at home right now that need to have that level. So know that congratulations on doing that, and you inspire large families as well.
Well, thank you.
So, well, thank you for joining me. I know I threw this in there was a lot of peer pressure involved in this, because it was a public invitation, and we appreciate it very much. And I've been looking through just to make sure. Yeah, somebody had meant, see, you still have to go back to the why we homeschool, and I agree. I think we need to own our swagger. I think, whether you have one child or 20 children, own it, right? And find the pros. Know what the cons are, but find, your strengths, your weaknesses, the opportunities that you have, and your threats, that SWOT analysis that you can use. And I know I've done teaching tips on that in the past. But everybody can find those sweet spots that families can thrive in, and move into that. So, do you have any parting words, Libby?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, when you invited me, I'm certainly not an expert, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm coming up here and saying that the way I do it is the way you should do it, because I know every family is different and we all have what works for us. So, just know that you're not alone. That's the biggest takeaway, I think, because, I felt a little, when we first started, I did kind of feel like I was an anomaly in the homeschool world, because everyone has a lot of children and I just had the one, and but I don't feel that way anymore. So, find your people, find your tribe, your group, your whatever they say, whatever that word is. Just find the people that you can relate to, that you have. One of my best friends also homeschools and only, so we're able to kind of bounce things back and forth off of each other, some of the challenges. And our students are entirely different. Her daughter is even more outgoing than my daughter. So wow. It definitely, that presents its own challenges.
Yeah. Do you think that a homeschooled child, and this is just a rabbit trail, but do you think that maybe homeschooled only children can tend to be more extroverted because they have a little bit more confidence?
I don't know. I mean, that would be an interesting topic just for the moms to discuss in the group. Just, do any of the moms of onlys have a child who's more introverted? Because I feel like my husband is extremely extroverted, and I feel like my daughter takes after him. But I wonder if maybe that's a thing. We've always joked when she was little that she has a self-esteem problem, and it's that she has too much of it. So I wonder if maybe that plays into it, because they get your undivided attention, so it kind of builds them up a little bit, and they've got that confidence.
Yeah.
I don't know. It'd be interesting to talk about.
It would. It's complicated, right? Because it also depends on what line of work you grow up in. I know families where kids grow up in businesses, they tend to be they just understand the climate. Kids who grow up in ministry sometimes can have a lot of insecurities because everybody's watching them, and they're always, you're told from a young age, be careful. What you do impacts the family, and you're very visible every week. You're the one who represents, your parents. So I think that there's a lot of variables, but it would be interesting to know for the people who are watching. If you comment and just let us know, do you think your children are more extroverted or more prone to confidence? I would say confidence more than extroverted or introverted. Yeah. And that would impact. And I think too, we always look at how does this translate into life, and looking at not just today and socialization, but just 20 years from now, is the behavior, is the patterns that I'm seeing, is this going to be a healthy and productive adult, and then you can adjust and tweak with that too. So very good. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and I pray that this was a blessing for families who have only children that they're homeschooling, or if you're considering homeschooling, please don't let that be a hindrance. There are so many different options and so many different ways you can do this. One size does not fit all for every family, and homeschooling has grown so much in the last 30 years. That finding the right curriculum, finding the right tribe to be part of, finding models and role models to associate with, it's available. It's pairing up and growth hacking, if you will. So, all right, well, I'm going to sign off. Feel free to stay on, Libby. I'll connect with you as soon as I sign it off.